Good afternoon. We are recording presently in a sauna, a bastu, close to the lake Jämnesjön, or St. James John, as my English friend's mother used to call it. It's a very lovely setting, and we have actually experienced some beautiful snowfall today. Maybe you could take a little gander outside there. It's beautiful. And over here we can see the lake.
Did you say 745?
Yes, 745. You can also record that. Now we can't see anything. So we put the fire on here. We have a couple of logs in, and it's quite pleasant already. It's a quick stove. And in this very crowded place, this is intentional. It's a low ceiling and it's very small. I would like to call out attention to something called compression. Compression is something we do on a daily basis, and that means that we're not taking in space, and the first thing that happens is the head goes down into the spine and back. This is the typical pull down, and we make our backs shorter literally and also narrower. And this compression is so common today that anatomists actually count on it to be developed during adulthood or late adolescence already. It has become the normal state of being. Actually, this body function is our life world today. Very, very crowded. And the idea of having it in this little crowded cabin is to show this is the life world for most of us. Because living in a compressed body makes that everything gets smaller, also in the outside. This lack of space is a progressing problem in modern times. We feel overcrowded, we feel rushed, we feel that we cannot breathe properly. And this feeling that we cannot breathe properly, that's completely literal. We know today that most people can't take a proper breath anymore because of this compression. When we collapse, not only the breathing system gets destroyed or at least affected in a disturbing way, also the digestive system gets affected. You are bound to get stomach problem, intestinal problems, things like constipation or the opposite. This is very, very common traits, and it starts to develop early on, especially the last 2 decades. It's been common among adolescents that they develop stomach problems, stomach pains and similar things. What is happening on the back region is this compression actually making the back shorter. And in the long run, it will actually destroy the discs between the cervicals. It will be very damaging. And the high number of back problems today, in Sweden it's about 38% of the adult population in working places are complaining of different back problems of a varying degree. But it's also becoming very common with more severe back pain. Recently, just a couple of months ago, I had a friend who was well trained. He was in his early 40s. He woke up one morning with a split hernia, and that will not heal ever. And he went from being what he thought being very pain-free, but he had misused himself to a rather advanced degree. And that actually paid its toll on the spine. It will always do. Every time you compress, you will destroy something in the body, little by little. It's an eroding process, and it's also a process that is quite new. This did not exist to any large scale earlier on in history. The development started in late 19th century, and now it's so common that we crowd ourselves, that not being crowded means almost that you are some sort of sports athlete or dancer or something of that sort. It's so uncommon. The doctors even react, somebody told me, if you do have a balanced posture. And as we mentioned before, there is something called new space or real space, and that means that the interior is always reflected in the exterior. That's something that easily can be shown with a Klein bottle. And according to the Klein bottle and its so-called topology, or you might call it logic, what will happen is the external space will also get more crowded. And this is the idea that we are standing here today within this little cabin, but actually we have a lot of space around us. And this should signify how we in our bodies are completely crowded, despite there is being an incredible expanse of space all around us. And I don't know if this little bastu or cabin is visible from the inside. If you slowly show the inside. Okay, let's see. Let's get me my smoking device here, necessary feature of lectures. And the same thing has been shown to be true also when it comes to the cousin of space, and that is time. Time takes its background from space. All the metaphors of time, all our thinking of time is taking its model from space. And a crowded space, not having enough room around oneself, is actually affecting the time. We are getting crowded time, and people are constantly complaining there being a lack of time. Especially the last 2 weeks here, Sweden is approaching Christmas. And so many people say to me, oh my God, I'm so stressed, Christmas is coming up. There's a lot of presents I need to buy, and I need to prepare the ham, and I need to do the Jansson's temptation. That's a very common dish here in Sweden. I wonder in my heart, where is the point of stressing so much to a weekend where you're supposed to relax? Doesn't really make sense, does it? And maybe a more pertinent question would be, will they be able to relax once the weekend comes? I'm not too sure about that, because we know the compression you establish in daily life, in your workplace, and whatever you do, or you go to school, that compression lingers on, it dwindles into your spare time. And it doesn't seem to do much help to go for a massage, or even a spa experience only opens up a little bit of all that space that should be available to you, because space never been a commodity that's been rare before. No, I'm afraid the tendency to compress lingers on into the weekend. And even if you completely collapse into the sofa, which is very common, and then you say, oh, I feel so relaxed. But that's in a state where you can hardly breathe, and your musculature is being tensed, actually being very tensed. Whereas some other parts of your body is being too flaccid, too loose. And this is this imbalanced system we are constantly living in today. And I would say that one of the reasons is actually that how we approach space today. We think of space as a sort of a container for things, and already there the problem starts. When you start thinking about space being only a container for objects, it's very easily in your mind to start thinking, oh my God, there's so many objects. Not only Christmas ham and glögg, there are other things protruding and pressing on your mind. And to make things even worse, we perceive ourselves to be an object in space. The common perception of ourselves, our bodily conception, doesn't come directly to consciousness anymore. It goes via, you could call it a model, sometimes I call it a gestalt, and that is the idea that the body occupies a certain piece of space. And that is looked upon from somewhere on the outside. It's very unknown where that point is, but somewhere somebody is looking at us and we contain a little piece of space. And you can imagine this idea, already thinking that my body can only occupy this small narrow space. That starts the whole perception of there not being any space for you to be in. And this tendency also have the property of blocking out space. We don't know anymore what's happening, not in our bodies and not even around us. I often like to compare her to what we call the primitive man, but I don't think it's so primitive, to be honest. For us, all the properties, the feelings and the effects are darkened out from the body. The body becomes this great unknown, something that Rosen called the apeiron, the scary horror vacui or something. And it's no longer in our knowledge, the body. We don't know the workings of the body. And in the end, we don't even take any interest into it. It's not a part of knowledge. It's such a reduced thing that hides from perception somehow. And I usually say that this means that the body is no longer known. It's not part of knowledge. And this is actually a very common trait among people. They don't know about the spine, they don't know how it works, they don't know about the movement in the underarm, they don't know about the movement in the upper arm, they don't know where the arm starts. That's not even interesting, that's not part of knowledge. And compare that to the expanded vision of the primitive man, who's always living in space and living into space, expanding into it. And ask them, people done that. They live in a world they know. They know the words for the different plants, hills, mountains. They know the names of the animals, and they always have a story to tell about that animal or that plant or that mountain or that hole. It's a part of knowledge. When it's a part of knowledge, it's part of space, and then you can expand. But for modern people, space is completely uninteresting. It's not something that's part of knowledge. And therefore that space disappears. And we stop believing that space has property we can learn by knowledge. And that the body is something we can learn from, learn with, and develop. Very interesting. Most primitive men perceive themselves to be developing the whole life. Not only until 20 years of old age or 25. That's the most common conception in modern society. You develop until you're 22 and then you sort of die day by day. That's almost the perception today. Everybody wants to stay young. They go to different courses to stay fit, they train, and they pretend to like the modern music. I don't know, it's a lot of stuff. This obsessiveness with being young, I think that is actually because there is no progression in our lives. We don't know the body more anymore when we are 30 or 40 or 50 than we are 20. Actually, it's just the opposite. We know today that you know less about the body when you are 30, even less so when you are 40. You lose reality inch by inch every day. And I think that has to do with our very narrow sense of perception. There is a gestalt, there is a model for space that apparently doesn't affect the primitive man, so to say, primitive man. And I would say that actually, even if I don't agree with Rousseau, in certain ways primitive man is much more advanced than modern man, civilized man, at least modern civilized man, in many aspects, because they know more about reality when they are 30, when they are 40, when they are 50. There is a progression. And there is also respect among the younger towards the elder, because they actually hold knowledge, a greater knowledge. Of course, if you're interested in reality, if you pay attention to the things, if you name every plant, tree, sometimes they're even given individual names. They're giving individuality. I can tell, for instance, in Japan, almost every big rock has a name as well. It has a kami. They develop time by time and they learn from their environment. And the reason is being, when they live in the world, when you name things, when you observe and name properties, you see the depth of the woods. And you use most of your environment. You make food of it, you hunt the animals. Well, certain animals you even train to make it your pets or household commodities of some sort. You interact. And what does primitive man does as well? They make use of their bodies when they do things. They do it practically. And that is being zuhanden, as Heidegger puts it. When you are zuhanden, you are actually using things around you. So you're not only naming them, you not only see their properties, learning by them, you also use them. And by using what's around you, you make it real. That's the only way of making anything real. It's by using it. And we also showed earlier on here Lakoff Johnson, for instance, but also the very excellent work of Barbara Tversky, that thinking is absolutely dependent on what you do. You don't think better than the action you do. So to be able to think clearly, sharply, making analysis, making intellectualizations, you need to do things in the world. World is not separated from an inner sphere, an interior that's shut off somehow and just being the inside, or for that sake transcendental or somewhere else. The only time the objects become real for us is when they stop working. And when do they stop working? Yeah, for instance, the car can start to break down. Maybe something is not working with the lighting system. Or it can also be something with your body. As my friend, his back is not working anymore. Now the back has become something for handen. It steps out of its unconscious use. But this way of putting the back is making the situation even more aggravated, because the back becomes a thing now, a thing that is hurting him constantly. And we know by turning pain into an object that's not part of yourself, pain becomes 10 times worse. 10 times worse. And that reminds me about my grandfather's father. He went to the doctor when he was at a rather advanced age, I don't know, 60, 65 something. And the doctor told him, well, you know, sir, that your leg is broken. He broke his leg when he was in his early 30s. Yes, I know, but doesn't it hurt? Because he had like healed the wrong way. And he had a certain limp, not much. He said, I don't think about it. He was living his pain. if you live your pain, it goes both ways. If you live in reality, all the pleasures becomes much more intense. If you compare the intensity of pleasure between primitive man enjoying a dinner or enjoying his daily life or sex or whatever, it's a big difference to modern man. When you're not in the body, you do not get pleasure. But the opposite is not true. If you're not aware of your body, your pain will get worse. Up to 10 times worse if you turn it into an object. Pain is supposed to be experienced, not turned into a thing within space. So we are losing in both ends. First problem is we're no longer part of reality. We lost interest in it. And if you don't put your interest in something, your capacity to understand it diminishes day by day, because that is actually build up knowledge. And I can't help but putting space in a very interesting perspective here. And I was thinking of when people actually put reality as a tool, when they turn in what you have around you into, as what Heidegger would say, Zug. That is expressed in Swedish as tyg. Tyg means material or tool. That's why it's called nattygsport, because the things for the nights are there. That caring the primitive put to the Zug, to the tyg, they make them more balanced within space. You expand automatically when you learn to do something, especially when you do something with your hands. The hands are very, very connected to speciality. By hands we understand space. This is something Barbara Tversky showed with absolute excellence in her so-called blind test, where people got to understand a problem, try to understand it, and they were using their hand to create spaces and relationship, decontextualization and recontextualization, length relation, parallel, and so forth. Everything we can do with our hands. So doing by hand is extremely important. This is the key to intelligence. Skill. Skill lies in the human hand. And when you use your hand, either directly or indirectly, to lead your way, you become much more in the world. And I think that is one of the things that we've forgotten. We don't treat the object with the care they need. We handle them brutally. We buy things, we throw them away, and in the actual touching process we are being gross, we're ripping things apart, we smash them, we're not being careful with these sensitive instruments. And if we're not sensitive to what we do with our hands, we also get brutalized in our minds, we get harder in our thinkings. And we actually become, as it says in the Bible, stiff-necked, hårdnackade. And stiff-necked is a modern tendency. We are harsher today than we used to be. We think harsher, we are less forgiving, we are much more reserved to other people. And we also give this reservedness to ourselves. We treat our bodies not like temples anymore, not anything sacred, not like the primitive. And a very good example that was actually given by Barbara Tversky, which I really love, and I think my colleague here, Kalle, liked it as well. That was about the cab driver in London. London is one of the biggest cities in the world, but to get your license to be a cab driver, you need to know every every single street, alley, pathway of London. The test is enormous, maybe the biggest test of knowledge ever. And what happens to these people is that they develop immensely. And when I read this the other day, I was just thinking to myself, how many cab drivers haven't I met in London who've been incredibly knowledgeable? They know so lot about the world, because when you start to interest yourself in the world, everything else comes sucking into this system. So it's not just the road system, which makes so many connections to what building it is, who used to live there. I remember one taxi driver who told me, there, your compatriot Swedenborg actually lived there for a long time. Yes, he lived in London. Nobody else told me that, not my history teacher. They know about the pit, the younger, the elder. They also know about cultures. And often you hear them snapping up languages like Swahili, Zulu, Malagasy, Urdu, for instance. Chop chop, I hear often, and also Acha, which means good in Urdu. That is amazing. There are incredible knowledge bank, and everything started with their keen interest in reality. And this is the second part of using the hand, because hand tells direction as well. So you use your hand indirectly by knowing how to orientate yourself within a city system. And it's not at all as straightforward as we think. Well, I memorized the map. No, you have to put yourself in an egocentric perspective. You driving or walking the distances. You have to walk there or drive there. It's absolutely necessary. You don't learn the map only, you learn it together with doing the thing. And it's completely nonsensical to say there could be a learning without doing. It doesn't exist. That's why knowledge has come to die. That's why Harold Bloom says there is no thinking anymore. There's no culture anymore.
Alan Bloom.
Alan Bloom. Probably Harold Bloom as well. I think he's a good chap as well. But the thing is, we have lost this sense of reality. And I think we can get it back. One of the most leading people when it comes to neurology today, Ian McGilchrist, says the same. If you start to get interested in reality, start naming the things, remembering them by heart, remember the taxi driver, how he remembers every road, and by that he put other knowledge in. Who did I drive? Oh, I drive the ambassador of Ghana. What did he tell me? He told me something about his wife's costume. And then you learn that, and then you learn a language example. And then you maybe learn about a dish from Ghana. And then you learn about nature in Ghana. And by the nature in the Ghana, you learn about the nature in Brazil. And then you learn something about the relationship between nature, carbon dioxide and oxygen. You can learn that the jungle helps us breathe. And it's important that we don't cut down the Amazon. This is actually a conversation I'd heard from a cab driver, driving me from the southernmost point of London, south of Southend, almost to the middle of London. It took 1 hour. But he told me this fantastic tale, and I realized this is one of the most noble person I've ever met. But he knew everything, he knew all aspects. It wasn't limited as it was, my knowledge was, I would say by then. Maybe probably still is. He knew on a broad perspective, and he knew from another way than I did. He knew from his body. He's been there. He experienced the ambassador of Ghana. Indirectly, he also met his wife. And this is what knowledge is. And in a way, it's not so hard to open up to these aspects. We can reach this. And the trick is to learn once more the simple details about reality. It's nothing fancy, to be completely honest. It is something very real. And the thing is, we have already started. We started in our youth to make mental connection between people, what they were saying, what they were doing, where they were living, geography, remember the hand and the directions. That is very important. You need to know where you are in space. And that is also one of the things that Tversky showed, that if you orientate yourself in space, that's incredibly important. And that can only be done in relationship to something else. And in order to relate to something else, you need to know that something else. But the good stuff is, by knowing that other things, for instance London, or start out with a smaller town, or just your neighborhood, you will also know more about yourself. Because if you take in the outward space, you definitely will take in the interior space. They're not separated. All research today is pointing to the same thing. It's just that the message hasn't come out yet. And it's a joyous message. It means that we have not lost our grip of reality. It means that we don't have to live like this anymore. It means that we have all opportunities. We haven't lost them. We don't need to spend our time in this little small cabin, mental cabin I mean now. We don't need to say, here ends my knowledge. No, I can take in every subject. I can take in different dishes. I can take in traditions from Uganda or Guyana in Southern America, or why not the Cape Horn? And I can combine that with history, language, biology, all the different species in Guyana, for instance. I develop more and more. And by that, I'm building a tremendous net. And I think most people today think, if I get all this knowledge, I'm going to lose the sense of my eye. And I think that is the most common conception. It's a little bit, I mentioned before, if people go into big, huge cathedral, they lose the sense of who they are, because they direct themselves, they orient themselves in such a narrow space. But it's the same with knowledge. Once you gain more knowledge, like the cab driver or monks that used to learn all the hymns by heart, you actually get stronger, you get more balance, and you start understanding yourself. It's a little bit reminder, I won't mention that now, but the apeiron, it's not something to be feared. It's something that is actually ourselves, our home. And we are shying away from knowledge. We even almost make knowledge illegal. It's not taught in the higher education anymore. It's become something absurd, something monosemic, something ridiculous, handled in a separated area, not connected to space, geography, which is incredibly important, because you are situated in the world, and where you are is your starting point. That's the only chance you have to be completely aware, is that you are yourself. You start with yourself. Your individuality has to come into the picture. And by having this idea of an object in space, you lose that. You can open up to that, and you can become whole, balanced, and healthy once more. And those words actually coming from the same root. Health and wholeness are both coming from heal or whole. And isn't that amazing? I rather round up as somebody else is going to have the bastu, but I say thank you very much, and I bid you a pleasant afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you.